Hi, everybody.
Hey guys and gals joining us. Pop over to the chat and let us know where you're from. I think we'll give everyone maybe yeah, about a minute, and then we can start. Joining from Prague. Welcome, welcome. And from Belgium, and Denmark, and Italy, Sweden, and USA.
Yeah, Atlanta. That's early for you. Or not, maybe not. That's 6 hours, right?
Yeah, I think that's 6 hours. It's
Yeah.
like 10 o'clock that side. Okay. Netherlands, Canada. Reminder, if you want everyone to be able to see your messages, you can just click to everyone instead of hosts and panelists in chat, okay? Okay.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, was it you? Haha.
Yeah. Oops. Me. I've been sending messages to hosts and panelists.
Ooh. Keeping notes. Okay. I think the rest of the team can all join as they come, but we might as well start so long. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Agile 42 webinar. Today's topic is Improve Your Scrum with Kanban, presented by Executive Coach and Certified Scrum Trainer Regina Martins. If you have any questions that you would like Regina to answer over the course of this webinar, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A section and we'll tackle them near the end, okay? And we'll also be recording this webinar session and send out a recording afterwards. So make sure to connect with us on the web. We'll post all our social media links in chat. And I think we can get started now. I'll hand over to Regina and enjoy with the webinar.
Thanks, Ernst. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get going. So you should all see a Scrum better with Kanban. So welcome to this webinar on improving your Scrum with Kanban, and it's quite an interesting topic. First of all, who am I? Well, I help teams unlock their high performance superpowers. High performance is within the grasp of all teams, and it's about getting the right coaching and the right guidance in order to achieve that. Of course, making the most of whatever tools and techniques that you're using is also part of it. I'm a Scrum Alliance certified Scrum trainer, and also I'm accredited Kanban trainer from the Kanban University as well. And in addition to that, I am a Kanban management professional. So I discovered Scrum about 15 years ago, so quite a long time. And shortly thereafter, I discovered Kanban. So I've also been a Kanban practitioner since around about 2011. So I know the benefits of both methods, and also I also know and have worked with clients where their Scrum has been improved or made better through the use of the Kanban practices and the Kanban principles. So that's who I am. Please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, and there's my email address if you wish to email me for additional information or even just to chat, or if you have a question that's related to your work and your job. So that's essentially who I am. I live in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I travel between Johannesburg and Cape Town to do my work. So, what am I going to cover today? Well, this is just a very brief agenda. So, first of all, we're going to start off with the poll, And after the poll, I'm just going to briefly touch on Scrum and Kanban, just literally a few seconds on Scrum, a few seconds on Kanban, and it becomes clear what the differences between each are. And then challenges of Scrum adoption, because the impetus for creating this program was that a lot of teams have challenges with their Scrum adoption. Then how Scrum can help, and then applying Kanban to Scrum. So what can you do to start off improving your Scrum with the Kanban principles and practices? And there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So please feel free to put your questions. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a tab that says Q&A. Put the questions there and not in the chat, because I might miss the ones in the chat. But if you put it on the Q&A, the special questions tab, we are going to go through, or I'm going to go through each one of those. All right, so let's kick this off with the poll, and I'm going to ask Ernst to launch the poll. So please just choose up to three reasons for attending this webinar today. So what are your top 3 reasons for attending the webinar today? Select up to 3 options. Okay, we'll run it for another approximately, another 10 seconds. We've got some good results so far. So curiosity being the main one. Okay. All right. Okay, so I am just going to do a screenshot. And with regards, so what do we have? We've got curiosity, not doing Scrum 100%, and an agile island in a waterfall world. Okay. Great. So those are really the main reasons. And not doing Scrum 100%, there could be a host of reasons why that is, which could be associated with the Agile Island, but it could also mean or have to do with your organization, the structures, the hierarchies, the levels, defensiveness, or any kind of organizational structure or resistance that there might be. It could really be anything. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Stop sharing. Okay, great. Good. So I'm just going to close this, and I want to move on to just briefly talk about Scrum and briefly talk about Kanban. This is not exhaustive. Okay, you can spend 2 days learning about Scrum and 2 days learning about about Kanban. This is just going through Scrum and Kanban briefly, just so we are setting the tone for the rest of what we're going to cover in this webinar. So briefly, Scrum. Well, Scrum, the important thing about this slide is that Scrum is a framework. It's also lightweight. It's got minimal number of elements, and it is purposefully incomplete. And for me, this is key towards helping using Scrum Kanban to improve your Scrum, because Scrum does not exclude the teams from using any other method or framework or process or tool or technique in order for the team to do their work. And this is why Scrum works very well with Kanban, because Scrum as a framework is not doesn't exclude anything else. And what Scrum does, it just defines the parts needed to implement Scrum theory. So if you look at the poster that is on the right-hand side, It's got the Scrum team that you all know consists of a product owner, Scrum Master, and the product developers. And the Scrum team works in events. So just below that, you've got this, they work in sprints. Sprint is an event, and a sprint starts off with the sprint planning. Then the team, the developers have a daily scrum every single day until they get to the end of the sprint. And then they have the sprint review where they manage stakeholder expectations, get feedback from stakeholders. And in addition to that, they also demo the increments, which is output of the sprint, and get feedback from that. And then that's followed by the sprint retrospective. And this happens in every sprint. Up at the top, you've got the artifacts of Scrum and the commitments of those artifacts. So we have a product backlog, and the product backlog exists in order for the product goal to be reached or achieved. So we have the outcomes and we've got the output. The outcome is reaching the product goal, and the output, well, all the things required to reach the product goal is in the product backlog. And similarly with the sprint goal and the sprint backlog, the outcome of each sprint is encapsulated in the sprint goal, and how that sprint goal is going to be achieved is in the sprint backlog. And then, of course, we've got the definition of done, which is the outcome of the increment. The increment being, if you're in software development, working software, working product, something that is desirable, usable, and able to be provided or given to your business or users to use immediately. And then, of course, the final element of the Scrum framework are the values of Scrum: focus, courage, respect, openness, and commitment. So it's lightweight. It's got the minimal parts needed to implement Scrum. Briefly, Kanban. Now, Kanban is not a framework, and it's also not a methodology. It's actually a management method, and that's an important distinction. It's a management method which allows teams to manage evolutionary change. Now, it's a method that is driven by principles and practices. And the principles and practices guide knowledge work. It guides the work of knowledge workers, of which we are all here, knowledge workers today. And it also helps manage that evolutionary change. In other words, in an evolutionary, incremental way, the teams are improving how they work and essentially improving service delivery. Now, Kanban can be applied on top of your existing process for knowledge work. So what this means is if your process is Scrum, you overlay Kanban over Scrum and work with both together. And what you get from that is a Kanban system which helps you control the work in progress and to ensure flow. And the evolutionary change is very important because evolutionary change is how teams improve. And there are some overlaps between Kanban and between Scrum. The retrospective is about improving. And Kanban talks about evolutionary change. Kanban talks about feedback loops. We're going to get there in a moment. And Scrum has got the retrospective and the daily Scrum and the sprint. Those are all feedback loops. So there is a nice synergy between both of these ways of working that can help teams improve service delivery. At the end of the day, that is what is the most important thing. So that's just briefly Scrum and Kanban and just the very high level differences between each one of these. Moving on to challenges with Scrum adoption. So in addition to the challenges that you identified during the poll, there are other challenges. And these challenges come from me working with people and people in my classes. So dependencies is a big challenge. So in Scrum, we would like our teams to be fully in control of their whole value stream. But the reality is that there are dependencies, they exist. Urgent, unplanned work happens all the time. Yes, you can make provision for bugs and defects or production support, but what if there's other urgent, unplanned work? No predictability as well, unable to forecast. And one of the powerhouses of Kanban is the metrics behind the Kanban method. Delays and last minute discovery. Because we know that in as much as we can do backlog refinement, do analysis, do your technical analysis, uh, we only know the work to be done when we actually start doing the work. That's when things actually come out. Apologies for that. And of course, the challenges lead to incomplete sprints, which creates a sprint carryover. Even though there's no such thing as sprint carryover, there's incomplete work. What do we do with them? Scrum says they need to go back into the product backlog. So what do you do with those? How does Kanban help with that? It leads to skipping sprint reviews and retrospectives. And of course, once you do that, you lose the ability to improve as well. So your cadence and your rhythm of Scrum is actually compromised. Now, how can Kanban help? Well, Kanban has got principles and practices. And for the purposes of this webinar, Um, we're going to look at the change management principles and the general practices of the Kanban method. So, and that's where we are going to focus on the rest of the webinar on. So let's start off with the change management principles. First of all, Kanban says start where you are. In whichever format you are, doesn't matter how your work currently looks like, how it flows. So you're visualizing your current processes, the existing roles, the existing responsibilities, and the existing job titles. You are not embarking upon changing those things at the beginning. And Scrum actually requires some change right at the outset. So Kanban says start where you are. Visualize what you're currently doing in its perfect or imperfect format. Because once you have a place to start, you then agree to pursue evolutionary change. You start where you are, see how work flows, or see how work doesn't flow, because work could actually start backing up due to bottlenecks, and then start making those small changes. So lots of small changes eventually leads to big change. So it's about pursuing evolutionary change. So change evolves as needed and as required. And then finally, it requires active leadership at all levels. It requires every single person in the team to get out of their comfort zones, because leadership comes when you step out of your comfort zone. Leadership is not a title, it's not a role, it's not a position, it's a capability that every single knowledge worker possesses. We all possess leadership, and we all are leaders in what we do. For example, in our areas of expertise, how we collaborate willingly with our team members, how we actively work towards making things better, how we actively are always looking at ideas to improve and do our work. So active leadership at all levels, that's what it means. Okay, get out of your comfort zone and help the team become better. Those are very simple change management principles. But you might be wondering, all right, so it's all very well to have these principles, but how do we actually go about doing this, improving our Scrum with Kanban? And that's what I'd like to focus on now, which are the practices of the Kanban method, the practices, the how. So how do we do it? And Kanban has 6 practices. And it's very important that every single one of these practices be in place. If you are missing any one of these practices, then you might be compromising things like creating a pull system, for example, or the ability to improve. So, first of all, it's about visualizing work. Then it's about limiting your work in progress, managing the flow, making your policies explicit, establishing feedback loops, and improving collaboratively and evolving experimentally. And I'm going to go through each one of these practices now, and I've got some examples to actually illustrate the practices. So visualizing, okay, well, whatever the work and the process of work looks like now, you need to visualize that work because that makes work transparent and creates insight. It actually surfaces work that is not made transparent. Um, and I'll never forget the one time where we actually visualized the work of a team. And once everyone had actually visualized the work, because there were people who were working individually in silos, independently, and once all the work was visualized, there was a little bit of a shock. You know, the whole thing around map shock. People weren't really before visualization, they didn't really know how much work was they were actually busy with as a team because not everything was made transparent. And when you make work transparent, it allows the team to make decisions around how to manage the work. It's when work is not made transparent that you start getting issues and problems, and the team loses the ability to get deep insights about their work. So examples of what you can visualize. Well, how the workflow, what's your process, right? I'll give you an example. Simple, 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 simple. Analysis, design, development, testing, go live. That's a process. But in that very simple value stream, there could be a lot of other things that is happening. For example, dependencies where work leaves the team, goes to another team for things to get done, and then comes back into the team. So visualize the flow of work flowing through the team's the team system, and work leaving your system and coming back into your system. Policies. Scrum talks about the definition of done, for example, as a policy that determines when is this increment ready to be released. That is part of Scrum. A lot of Scrum teams use the definition of ready. It's not part of Scrum, but because Scrum doesn't exclude other techniques, a lot of teams find it very useful to actually work with the definition of done, and that is, sorry, definition of ready, and that is, all right, are these items from the product backlog now ready to go into the sprint because we've estimated them and we've broken them down, therefore we can pull them into the next sprint. Those are 2 examples of policies. And like those 2 policies, your team has policies and it's about making them explicit. Then you can visualize risks. Where do you visualize risks? Where are your risks currently? Yes, for example, your risks might be a part of your Jira ticket. Maybe they're not. Where are the risks being visualized? Blockers. Are they visible? Are they transparent in whatever system you're currently using? Who's working on what? And visualizing any charts or metrics as well. So you actually, through visualization, creating a visual model that shows how the team actually works. Because only when this is done can a team make decisions about evolving. So this is an example of visualization. It's a very, very large visualization. Actually, this was done pre-COVID. literally months before we went into lockdown. And this is an example of a visualization. Of course, your Jira boards or your Azure DevOps will look very different, and every team will look different. But this is about putting all the work on the board. And the beauty of visualizing is that you can immediately, at a glance, see where the problems lie. So if you're looking in the middle of the board, you can see where we got a problem. And the problem is sitting where you got that concentration of pink sticky notes. So the visualization is very important. So this is an example. Okay, now the second practice is to limit your work in progress. Now, I have to just say that visualizing the work is the easiest thing to do. It is. It is. It's visualizing. It's there. You visualize it, right? Visualization is easy. Everybody enjoys doing that. But where the proverbial rubber hits the road is when you need to start limiting your work in progress. It's hard to limit your work in progress. And here's the thing when you start trying to limit your work in progress. How do you know what is your work in progress? Initially, you don't know. And there's many different ways of limiting your work in progress. And you can experiment with work in progress limits. So, question for you to just ponder. Is this what your board looks like right now? Is it a bit of a traffic jam? Are there lots of big items? Are there items that are blocked? And do you have lots of little items, the motorbikes? Do you have lots of little items that your team's still busy with as well? And how, with this type of picture, can you actually create flow? So you need to actually limit the work in progress. So here's a little bit more information. You limit your work in progress that relates to capacity. It's very important that you know the capacity and that the work that is in progress at any one time is not exceeding your capacity. I mean, that makes sense because when work exceeds capacity, you have a bit of a bottleneck. Imagine if you are on a freeway and you got three freeways and the freeways are beautiful and large and free, and the freeways merge onto a single freeway. There's three freeways merging onto a single freeway. So you've got a lot of cars, but all of a sudden there's a bottleneck. And your work, your team's work, your system is only as fast as that bottleneck, right? You can have a lot of things that your team's doing, but your work can only deliver as much work as can fit into that bottleneck. That's the capacity for that particular part of the system. Now, Kanban, and Scrum as well, they are pull systems. Pull systems help balance demand and capacity. So a push system is, for example, and without picking on project managers, I used to be a project manager myself, so I'm not picking on them. They are just probably a very relatable example is and pushing work onto the team, telling the team, this is what I need you to do, right? A pull system is where this is a backlog of work. And by the way, the word backlog doesn't mean work that's delayed. According to Lean, a backlog means work that has not started yet. So you have a backlog, whether it's a product backlog or a sprint backlog, okay? And based on capacity, the developers pull work, and that creates flow. So work is not being pushed to them. They pull work based on their capacity, and that helps create flow. And limiting work in progress is what enables this to happen, because the focus is on finishing work. Now, I keep saying this to people often, especially people that I train. A sprint is not an event to start work. It's an event to finish work. So when a Scrum team or the developers pull work into the sprint, they do it because they know they're going to finish it by the end of the sprint, right? So it's about focusing on finishing the work before new work can start. And I just want to show you or point out In the drawing below, you've got just you got an example of a visualization. And if you look at the top of each column, so you've got ideas, research, refine, selected, and so on. And at the top of each one of these columns, you've got a number in a circle. That is a work in progress limit. And in a Kanban visualization, the work in progress limit, well, it can be linked to columns, but it can also be linked to the whole system. But this is an example where you cannot have more than 10 ideas in this board. Now, by limiting the number of ideas, actually ensures that the product owner or the delivery manager or whoever is prioritizing the work is doing good prioritization based on real value requirements. If you look at research, for example, the work in progress limit, there's two. Only two research items can be in progress at any one time. And sometimes the research or the items might be linked to the number of researchers, or it might be linked to the capacity. And each team will have different ways of determining their work in progress limit. The key thing here is the work in progress limit is visible and everybody knows what it is. Now, you might be asking a question. So what do we do if we actually break the work in progress limit? Well, if you have to do it, I trust that there's a good reason why you are exceeding the work in progress limit at any one time. It's very important to have that retrospective, to actually reflect on why did we break the work in progress limit, and then make a decision. Yes, we did it because it was an exception, or maybe we should adjust our work in progress limit for the next sprint. So it's all about visibility, because visibility enables good decision making, and good decision making enables improvements to be done by the team. So limiting work, it looks easy, it's the hardest. It's where 90% of teams that I've coached have actually fallen off the bus. So beware. Don't take this lightly. Limit your work in progress. And of course, you can always reflect and see if it's still appropriate for your needs. Okay, that's a second practice. I can actually speak to work in progress a lot because I can see where things actually go off the rails here. But let's move on to the third practice, which is about managing flow. Now, these practices are almost they are cumulative on one another. You visualize the work, then you limit work in progress, because that's going to help flow, right? And the important mantra here is manage the work, not the workers. Let people self-organize around the work. The work is there, the work's visible, everybody knows these are our goals. This is what we need to, this is what we're working towards. These are our deadlines if you are working according to deadlines. Manage the work, not the workers. Let people self-organize and figure out how to do their work and figure out how to flow around their work. And managing flow is around just looking at how work moves, right? It's like how is this ticket moving through the process? Is it getting stuck somewhere? Are we doing too much work? Do we actually have a blocker? These are all things that actually will impact. And the important thing here, if you just take one thing away from managing flow, is make your flow decisions based on real data, metrics, okay? Because that is what's, and the graphs will give, at a glance, can actually give you a lot of insights around how your work is flowing. And of course, it's about improvements, about observing, analyzing the data, and improving your flow. Now, I want to give you an example. So in the Netherlands, this is an example from the Netherlands. During the day, the maximum speed limit on a highway is 100 kilometers per hour. And when the highway is busy, the control room, and this is someone sitting in a control room, and they will get an alert and they may decide to actually lower the speed limit, which is going to slow down the highway, the freeway. So the differences in speed between people in the fast lane and people in the slow lane are not going to be too different. However, this decision can lead to even slower trafficking, even to greater bottlenecks. Another technique to manage flow on a highway in the Netherlands, and we have it here in South Africa, we don't use it, unfortunately, is by limiting the number of cars entering the freeway at the on-ramps. So cars will wait on the on-ramp before there's until there's space. Then as soon as there's space, there's a sign which allows a certain number of cars into the freeway, and then the sign goes off and everyone else must carry on waiting. Now, that is based on data. It's based on information. They know how many cars can this freeway take. And it's not always about the whole freeway, but about certain sections of the freeway. And the controllers are managing the flow of traffic onto this freeway to ensure that you don't get bottlenecks or stop-start traffic, because a freeway or a highway is supposed to be a free-flowing roadway. And that actually helps them manage flow. So they are setting those limits. Now, of course, you could also get a situation where if you're only allowing a few cars into the freeway based on how much the freeway can take, you might start getting a backup or on the on-ramp to the freeway. So the controllers in the Netherlands are also looking at how many cars are being backed up on the on-ramp, because you don't want to create a wonderful situation on the freeway and make something worse further down the line. And that's actually quite an important metaphor, because quite often, and I'm talking to those of you who are in IT or software development, when the work comes to you, okay, you have a limited time to actually get the work done. But the work that those requirements have probably been on the go for a few weeks or a few months, right? So it's about managing the flow across the whole value stream and not only when it hits the IT team. Okay, I want to go on to the next one. And then the next one is to make policies explicit. And we've already spoken about a few policies. So, for example, we spoke about the definition of done as being a policy. The definition of ready is another example of a policy. The work in progress limits are policies. Policies actually shape the work to be done. It actually determines how the work is done. How does one item move from one state to another? For example, how does an item go from analysis to development? Um, what are the pool criteria? What will determine that? And there could be different things. For example, it's been analyzed, it's been broken down into smaller pieces, it's been estimated. There's wireframes and other artifacts or documentation that is required by the developers in order to develop what needs to be done. So those are just some examples of policies. Classes of service, and I'm not going to, I'm not going into classes of service in this presentation, but I'll give you an example of a class of service. Production issues that are mission critical. Those typically get assigned an expedite class of service. So we need to expedite this item because it's actually a mission critical, maybe business brand compromising piece of work. And then that item gets expedited, which means that all the other items get, wait until this item is done. Now, it's very important that when you got expedite items, that you don't have too many of them. And if you do, just a little bit of a tip. Why is that happening? That's why you have retrospectives. Dependencies. How do you handle dependencies? This is so critical. So many teams have external dependencies, maybe another team in the company or maybe an external vendor. How are we going to handle these dependencies? It's nice and it's visible for everybody. Blockers, how do we handle blockers? Who is going to take care of this type of blocker? And so on. How a block is going to be communicated. Everyone asks me, if the Scrum Master is not in the daily Scrum, how do they know about the blocker? Well, create a policy. How do we make blockers transparent to everybody? And then, of course, policies must be agreed and visible by everybody. So when I actually sit with a team to design their Kanban systems, we sit and collectively co-create the policies. And I want to give you an example of policy. So WIP limits are policies. Is it ready to pull into the next activity are policies. So if you look at the bottom of the board, you see these squares or these squares. They represent the policies. Okay, this is how work moves from one state to another. Right. So you need to ensure that your Jira or your Azure DevOps is able to cater for, these policies. Okay. Establish feedback loops. That's our next practice. And I want to just say one thing. Feedback without action is not a feedback loop. Okay. You have a feedback, something needs to be done about it. So action makes that feedback into a loop. And it starts with info about how the work happens. So how is the work happening? What are our bottlenecks? What are our blockers? What are the issues we're facing? How can we improve and get better? And feedback loops happens at the right cadence. So in Scrum, there are many feedback loops. So you have the daily Scrum, it's a daily feedback loop. The Scrum team talks about or inspects progress towards a sprint goal, and they adapt the daily plan. That's a feedback loop, right? They inspect and then they adapt. There's an action. Another example of a feedback loop is it's your sprint review. You're doing your sprint review with your stakeholders. They're giving you feedback. What are you going to do about that feedback? What's the action? Is it going to go into the product backlog? What's the priority? Are there new deadline dates? Is it acceptable to the stakeholders and so on? Retrospectives. It's all very well having a retrospective and teams come up with improvements, but it's not an improvement until it's been acted upon. You can have lists and lists and lists of improvements, but unless there's been an action, that feedback has not been closed off. So it's very important that feedback loops have actions associated with them. And in Kanban, we actually like our feedback loops to be data-driven. Okay. Yes, we can talk about the retrospectives, talk about what worked well and what didn't, and other types of feedback loops that is not mentioned in Scrum is, for example, if your team is at a particularly bad sprint where there were a lot of dependencies or a lot of blockers, how about actually having an improvement feedback loop around analyzing those blockers? Where are these blockers coming from? How can we prevent these blockers from happening again? That is a feedback loop, and that's an improvement feedback loop, which can be done as part of the retrospective. So the data aspect of feedback loops are important. And then finally, the last practice is to improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. And it's about going deeper, digging deeper into finding the causes of problems and doing something about it. And because Kanban is a is a statistical process control based, we use the scientific method in order to create experiments to determine what improvements can we actually, what improvements are going to work for us. You don't know if an improvement is going to work, if that action is going to work until you've tried it out. So you develop hypotheses and then you prove the hypotheses. Is it valid? Is it not valid? So you run safe to fail experiments. You experiment, you observe what's happening in the experiment, the results of the experiment, you reflect on it, and you iterate. So it's about a constant experimental evolution of improving how the work gets done. And uh, applying Scrum to Kanban. So this is just some recommendations where to start off. First of all, determine the types of work. For example, you may be working with user stories. You've got bugs, you've got production issues. You might have business as usual items, ad hoc items, technical debt, spikes, and research and development and analysis. There are any number of different types of items that any team has at any one go. And the flow, the process to actually getting those items done might be different. So you actually want to visualize those differences. So that's what it means. Map their workflows. They may be different. Visualize the workflow, and then follow the rest of the practices, which I won't go through. I've just covered them. And then become data driven. Analyze the data, grab your metrics, what charts, what things are being plotted, and if your Jira is or Azure DevOps is properly set up, it does it for you. But I just want to caution you on one thing, okay? Rubbish in, rubbish out. If your tickets are not being updated, the moment the state changes, then you may have your data being skewed, and you don't want to work with skewed data. Manage the change, manage the resistance. How do you do that? Through evolutionary change, by not changing things, starting where you are. Don't make any changes to roles and titles and how the team works. Acknowledge that there's resistance and technical difficulties, right? You're not changing things, you're just mapping, starting where you are. And for me, that is the least non-threatening aspect of agile adoption. Start where you are. We're not saying change. Start where you are and then incrementally see where things need to change and collaboratively apply those changes. And then keep doing Scrum, right? We're not saying you need to do Kanban. This is about improving your Scrum with the Kanban practices. So still have your planning, still have your dailies. They're important because your planning and your dailies, especially your dailies, they're feedback loops. Are we still on track? Yes, awesome. No, what do we need to change? Start course correcting all the time. Your reviews, don't skip your reviews and don't skip your retros. Sometimes it's hard when you have nothing to show or you don't want to come across as not having completed stuff with your stakeholders. And retrospectives. Those are the reviews and the retros are the easiest to skip. So keep doing Scrum, don't skip, and improve things with Kanban. And now it's question time. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to see what questions we have. So there's quite a few questions. All right. So first question, how do you manage WIP limits when not all of your team can work on every ticket? Sub-teams. Well, that's a great question. Different ways of managing WIP. In this case, you can manage WIP per sub-team. Okay, you remember, Kanban doesn't say you can't have sub-teams, right? So whatever the sub-teams are, you are mapping out the work of the sub-teams. It's part of the flow. And you can actually have a WIP limit for the sub-teams. So that's how, without knowing more about the problem, is map out the sub-team. It belongs in as part of the flow, the process, and then create or collaboratively create a WIP limit for your sub-team. Okay, in Kanban, how would you split the work? That is what is defined and on each post-it note. How to split the work? You can split you can refine the work into smaller pieces, and then let the team decide how to split that work. It's, manage the work, not the workers. And it is, and I haven't covered this because we just don't have time because, this whole thing is just so broad. So when you actually start, when the team starts working on a ticket, they start tracking lead time. How long does it take to get from start to finish? Plus, what were all the interruptions and things like that. And it's trying to split the work as far as you can, but it's not saying that you have to split the work. You're going to have work of different varying sizes. And through running that, through the work flowing through the process, will it become clear that, this work was not well defined. So when it is apparent that the work hasn't been well defined, that's when, everyone stops and says, okay, what are we going to do about this? Yes, it's going to take longer than what we thought. Uh, and maybe the work can be split out. So Scrum talks about user stories, and you run the user story. For example, in Kanban, it doesn't actually say that. It actually says, visualize the work. If the work needs to be split out into smaller pieces and each piece needs to run through the process, then that's what you do. Okay, so in my project, we have 2 development teams working full remote, and we recently moved from Scrum to Kanban. The challenge is always the same. Developers have the tendency to work in a solitary way on different issues, and they cooperate more than collaborate. Yeah, of course, the remote working doesn't help. Yes, very true. How can we help the developers improve their close collaboration on a single item? First of all, ensure that the work is visible, right? And that each developer's piece of work for a particular item is visible. And then it's asking the question to the team. So how are you going to do the work? So you're actually managing the work and not the workers. Um, and initially, they might seem a little bit reluctant to do that, and it does require some change management. So it's just important to actually ensure that they are able to see the work through. So manage the work, not the workers. Um, Coach them to collaborate. Uh, yeah, and I probably haven't answered the question fully. So if you want to chat more about this, please ping me. Generally speaking, what's a typical amount of time for a team to stabilize their various work limits for their context? If these limits continue to change after XYZ time, this might be considered not part of a healthy exception, retro adjust improvement. I'm going to answer that question in a different way. Yeah, we want to stabilize on work limits. I just want you to perhaps not focus so much on the WIP limits, but to focus on the flow. Is the team flowing? Is the work flowing, or is it bottlenecking? Is it backing up somewhere? So look at that and then work back and look and see if, look at the WIP limits based on that. Yes, sometimes the team may need to change the WIP limits for a specific piece of work, which is only related to that piece of work. So I wouldn't worry too much about the WIP limit itself and stabilizing on that. I would look and answer, is the team flowing? And that's the important question. Other than the WIP limit, isn't this just Scrum? Actually, no, it's not just Scrum. It's I've only scratched the surface of Kanban, right? So I'll give you some example, 1 or 2 examples. So Scrum works in sprints between 1 and 4 weeks. Kanban doesn't talk about sprints. Okay, it just talks about feedback loops. So have those feedback loops. Scrum actually guides and says it's got the discipline. The sprint is a feedback loop, and we have a retrospective at the end. And that means it's the end of that feedback loop. The new feedback loop, aka the sprint, starts with the sprint planning. So Kanban does not talk about feedback loops as well. Sorry, it doesn't talk about sprints. Kanban also doesn't talk about Scrum Master, product owner, developers. It just talks about team members whatever role they are. Uh, Scrum talks about dedicated teams that are between, up to 10 people. Kanban doesn't talk about that. It doesn't specify how many people is in your team, it doesn't specify that the team is dedicated, right? It just says the team needs, whoever's working together needs to self-organize around the work. And those are just some differences. Okay. Most of it sounds like the only difference not doing a sprint but managing WIP limits instead. Uh, yeah, I think I've answered that question. Um, and how often do you do team check-ins such as reviews, demos, retrospectives, and so on? Um, well, here's a question for you. How quickly do you want feedback from your stakeholders? If your stakeholders want feedback every week, then you got a 1 week feedback loop. If your stakeholders, can wait a month, then your feedback loop is a month. So I do recommend that the daily stand-ups happen every single day. Those are critical. And one of my teams, actually, what they did is we still had our retrospectives every 3 weeks. Um, when it came to the reviews or the demo part of the review, every time an item was ready for release, that's when the review was done per item. So again, Kanban does not prescribe that. Scrum provides that guidance. So if you are running 2 week sprints, then have it every 2 weeks, right? Um, what makes sense? How quickly do your stakeholders want feedback? How quickly do your developers want feedback as well? So you can still continue with your current cadence of the Scrum events as well. Without a goal of a sprint 2 week, how do you prevent a large piece of work coming into Kanban and dragging on for a long time? Yeah. Mm. So, excuse me. Yeah, without a sprint goal, yeah, you need goals and outcomes, right? But let's say there's no sprint goal. How do how do you prevent a big piece of work so when a big piece of work is actually placed on the queue, I do even a team that's not doing Scrum, okay, even a team that's just purely doing Kanban, I expect that team to do some kind of refinement, understand the work to be done. Have we done this kind of work before? Do we need to break it down into smaller pieces? Is there risk? Do we actually, how many teams are involved? Are there any external dependencies? Do we have the infrastructure? There's a lot that needs to be discussed before a piece of work can actually make it into the input queue for starting the work. So yeah, maybe that's done as soon as items come in, for example, right? And then how do you prevent a large piece of work? Well, let me paint you a scenario. So let's say you do have a large piece of work coming in, okay? You start tracking lead times. You start tracking start time and end time. So you can track lead time, which is from the time from the time that item came in to when it's deployed. That's the lead time. For example, it took us 15 days from beginning to end. And you can also start tracking lead time or rather cycle time per state. So for example, let's say the first thing that happens is analysis. That big item goes into analysis, the analysis gets done, and then you're tracking how long is this item taking in analysis. And how long is it taking in each state? And if something is taking quite a long time, you look at those metrics, at those stats, and you actually say, all right, this has been 10 days in analysis. What's going on? What's our problem? Why are we not flowing? And that's how you actually track it. And yes, it means that you have to flow or work, that item is going to have to go through the process, but there's learnings in that, right? And Okay, Ernest has come on. I'm just gonna quickly finish, and it's looking back at your metrics and plotting your metrics on charts. That's going to help you understand what is a big item is, for example. So when you get another big item, maybe it's an extra large, maybe it needs to be a small or a medium, and treat it that way. Yeah. Over time, that familiarity will become part of the muscle memory of the team. Okay, and there's two more questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to them, and we'll include the answers to these questions in the follow-up email.
Okay, so if you guys would like to connect with us on social media or sign up to our newsletter and stay in the loop for any future webinars, you can check for the links in this chat. The recording for this webinar will be sent out via email. So if you'd like to receive that, please feel free to sign up and get notified. And thank you, Regina. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. It was great having you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.